Welcome to the Spy Who Raised Me podcast. Conversations between a daughter and her father. Yes, you've guessed it, he was a spy. Hi, I'm Jane Craigie, and I'm recording this podcast with my dad, Iain Craigie, over Zoom because we're still in lockdown. So Dad's sitting outside in the sunshine, and you'll be able to pick up the birds tweeting in the background. So, how are you, Dad?
Yeah, I'm good. It's lovely. The temperature's good. The sun's out. The birds are all whistling, and the new flocks of birds are appearing out of little nests. I've just watched a sparrow feeding its young in a gutter where it's got a little nest.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, today we're going to be talking about your time in India, which was from 1969 through to 1972. And we'll talk through what you did while you were out there and a little bit about life in India at that time. And also, it was a time when my little sister Emma was born. So she's got an exotic story to tell in that she was born in New Delhi in the early 1970s. So I'm going to ask Dad for a little bit of context to why GCHQ and British intelligence was interested in India and why you were based there at that time.
Yeah, I think that was quite a time of change, and 69 through to 72. And our main interest was what China was doing. China is a very restless, populous nation, and at that time they were looking for places they could annex so that they could move in and move some of their population, because they had a huge population even in that time, 70, 71, 72. And they were interested in Tibet, for one thing, which was under contention, and they just liked the thought that they could build up a buffer between themselves and other probably hostile countries by annexing these places. So Tibet in 1959 was more or less annexed by China. That was at the time that the Dalai Lama went into exile. So it gave the Chinese an opportunity to move in and virtually take over. And there was Jakarta, which was on the southern side of China, and they had great ideas about Jakarta. That was one of the targets we had when we went to India. We had to survey that particular area to see what was happening and how successful the Chinese had been in moving in and establishing bases. There was also Taiwan, which was part of their scheme, and they actually annexed that in 1971 at the time we were in India. But they also had Manchuria in their sights. Manchuria at that time was not a developed country, but it had huge coal reserves and fertile ground. So the Chinese were looking at that. They were expanding quite rapidly. So they needed energy. So they must have thought, well, if we can do some work in Manchuria, we can get what we need in terms of expanding our industrial base. So that basically was what we were there for. And the situation was that it was very much try and see, because with the Himalayas and with the prevailing weather conditions in north of India and further north into China, reception conditions weren't that good. So we had to try and find out when it was suitable, convenient, sensible to try and pick up some of these transmissions and to try and put it into some sort of intelligence structure that people could understand and give indications as to what Chinese hopes and aspirations were in that area.
And Dad, also geographically, and also, fast forward a decade, we had the situation of the Russians invading Afghanistan. So that whole area was not just of interest to the Chinese, but it was also of interest to the Russians. At the time that you were based in New Delhi, was Russia a target for you as well?
Yeah, Russia was a target, but it was a secondary target. It was really the Chinese activities that we were more interested in. The Russians, of course, moved into Afghanistan to support the communist government in Afghanistan, which was under pressure with the Mujahideen and so on. So, although there was one could say, a connection between what the Chinese were doing and what the Russians were doing at the time. But we didn't have specific targets.
Which I suppose for both of them was about power and land, as always.
Yes.
Yeah. And Dad, so you touched a little bit on the terrain and how that might affect your ability to listen. Just tell us a little bit about what equipment you were using, and also the complexity of having to listen to try and pick up intelligence given that terrain and the interference that the mountains might cause with the equipment and the listening that you were undertaking.
Yeah, the equipment we had was fairly basic. It was mainly high frequency transmissions we were looking for, and it was at a time when the satellite effort by various countries had not really developed to any extent. So we had this operational setup which had up-to-date equipment, but with a limited perception in terms of what frequencies we were surveilling. And of course, with the Himalayas being so close, and with the climate of northern India and southern China, there was an awful lot of static and fading signals. And I can remember one of the targets we had was GCHQ, which is between India and China. And China had always had their eye on GCHQ, and we thought they were moving in to establish some sort of base. And we sat and listened for, I think it was a year, hopefully, trying to intercept the transmissions from GCHQ, but we were never successful. And it was a long trying experience, trying to listen through static. And if you had the monsoons and the storms and so on, it was absolutely purgatory to sit there with all that noise and crackling and so on. It didn't do any of our ears any good, I don't think. But that was not a very successful mission. But the other targets were more so, and I think they were just establishing that Chinese had moved into certain areas like Manchuria, like Tibet, and that gave some idea of what they were doing, what their targets were.
And Dad, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is the other sources of intelligence, and you picked up information from embassies all over the world, and also in that region you had other facilities, GCHQ facilities, British intelligence facilities, like in Islamabad. How did that intelligence, that insight that came from those individual embassies feed into your knowledge and piecing together what was happening?
Well, I think on more of a social basis, one of the priorities for us was trying to get some idea of what effort, say, the Russians were capable of in their embassy and other countries' embassies. And it was quite a game, because we used to go to the sort of social do's they had at that time in Delhi, cocktail parties and so on, where embassies from other parts of Delhi and other countries used to be, we used to have to try and suss out who the people were doing the same job as we were, and it's a sort of game with us. But I think on the whole, we established quite quickly who they were, because they were equally furtive. I think we had to be quite furtive and sort of not mainstream diplomatic service. So I think that stood out in company. So that was a bit of a game. But yeah, whether the information we fed back to the appropriate authorities was helpful, I don't know, but we did it anyway.
And that brings me on to how. So you're talking about identifying who in those cocktail parties were spies, essentially. So what are the telltale signs of who's a spy?
Well, usually in a foreign office, in a embassy or a high commission, whatever, people have, and I think it still is the case, they have levels of authority, also of sort of work that people do, and it's very easy to stand and watch and find out who the ones who are in some authority are, whether they're diplomats, whether they're HR looking after staff, whether they're in charge of the local people who work in that embassy. So over a period, you get quite skilled at looking and listening. And even after an hour at a function like that, pointing and saying, yeah, he's definitely this, and he's definitely that, or she's definitely this. And it builds up a picture. And I'm sure they did the same thing with us. And we were sometimes quite conscious of the fact that we were slightly different from the FNC, or the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I mean, their background was very stratified and very predictable. They had the same social background, a lot of them, and the same educational background. So they stood out, and even the way they spoke was different. So that was quite an interesting thing I found in high commissions.
There's two really interesting things that you've just touched on, Dad. One is people watching, and all your life, and it's something that I think all of us children have gained from spending so much time with you, that we're all avid people watchers. And then the second thing is this difference in the type of people that were recruited by the Foreign and Commonwealth offices, and also into GCHQ and intelligence. Could you tell us a little bit about both your people watching skills and also the differences between the people that came into your discipline and those into the wider diplomatic set?
Yeah, that I always found that interesting. I mean, I've always liked being with people, looking, judging, and so on, and finding out about what they did. Part of our purpose in this world is to interact and be interested in people. But at that time, from the 1950s, 60s, I mean, you think of the intelligence services, how strict a regime was in terms of sexual activities and so on. They were so strict, and of course, gay people were not accepted into the workplace if it was known that they were gay people. But in general terms, the background for intelligence, people who to work in intelligence, was very predictable. They looked for people who had gone through the usual system of private school to university, prestigious universities, and that mainly was for the diplomatic side. On the other side, they had the need to have people who were cyber aware, knew how to try and crack codes like they did at Bletchley before that time and during that time. So it was a peculiar sort of mix of people. You could almost look at them and tell the ones who were guys who were working in the cyber department, because they were loners. They were very mathematically aware of what was going on in the cyber world. They tended to be in offices where the door was closed and they didn't have much interaction with other people. So we used to say, just put them in the office, give them all they need, and close the door, and they'll be quite happy. And generally speaking, that was the case. On the other hand, with the upper echelons, you might say, of organizations like GCHQ, it was again very predictable. I remember on one occasion I had to go for interview for one of the top jobs, and they had an array of very stern, austere-looking people who were the board members, and I thought that the whole attitude was one of, let's see if he's one of us, or if he's. One of the questions that was asked with particular emphasis was, and what university did you go to? And when I said Aberdeen University, I could see the downcast eyes and little notes being taken along the table. So that, you're not going to win this one, Craigie. So
you're not one of us.
You're not one of us. So, and I think extending that into to work overseas, that remember in Delhi, that was not that long after India achieved independence in 1947. I mean, it's only a number of years, and the mixture of people that one found in the High Commission at one time, all embassies were the same, were perhaps the remnants, the vestiges of a different culture when the Raj was established then when independence came, but there were still a number of people who'd been around in the early 50s, mid 50s, and they were particular. They stood out, but quite in some strange ways. They were very much old colonial people, attitudes to locally employed staff and so on, to language, native languages and all of that, and just the general lack of staff, I would think, management. It was a very, very sort of rigid, frigid system, and I didn't like it very much. I think it's changing now, but it was very marked then.
And interestingly, Dad, that's it's quite a connection that India and Britain had, in that India had Britain had the class system, mm-hmm. and then India had the caste system. Yeah. And I suppose it's an opportune time to start talking about our life living in the High Commission grounds of the British Embassy in India. And we weren't unusual in employing 4 servants within we lived in a block of flats in the High Commission compound. Yet we had an ayah, a dobi ayah, we had a cook, and I can't remember what the other person did, but we had 4 staff, and that wasn't unusual and still isn't unusual. Could you just talk us through a little bit about that, the dynamics of that, and also wider what it was like living in the High Commission during that era?
Yeah, that was, I found that very interesting because, as you say, we had 4 servants, I think it was. Suresh was the other one. There was Gurdari Lal, who was the cook, a very gentle, very diffident man. Mary Das, who was a Christian from Kerala. She was diminutive. She was about 4'11", I think, and spindly little arms. And I remember she dropped Emma into the bath once. She had difficulty getting her back out again, but lovely people. And Suresh was he sort of did everything around the place. But yeah, and there's a marked I don't know, it's strange. I was never comfortable with it. They had one instance I recall. They had a Hindu tennis coach. They had two courts in the High Commission, and when I got there, they sort of press gang me into being in charge of the tennis courts. So they had meetings periodically to so that everyone could be refreshed on what was happening on the tennis court. On this occasion, I'd only been there for a few months, and I remember being invited to this meeting that had various people. One such without mentioning a name was very overbearing and liked very much testing people's mettle by being offensive. And he asked me the question. He said, "Now we have a difficulty here in the tennis club because the coach, Salim, he was called, Salim has asked if he can go undercover on the courts, because there was no hut or pavilion, undercover in the flats, which had a sort of overhang, to have his tea and his lunch. What do you think?" And of course, I was at that stage sussing out the pros and the cons and where the power was and all of that. But he'd done that to embarrass me, to see what I was going to say. And I was kind of a wee bit cheeky, but I said, "Well, I've only been here a couple of months, and you've been here for 2 years. I would bow to your authority, and whatever judgment you make, I'd be quite happy to go along with that." We didn't like that because it avoided a confrontation, but yeah, that was part of it. And as far as that sort of link between the powers that be and the High Commission and Indian society generally, I mean, because of the long occupation of India by Britain, it was so British in some areas. You could move around, and they had gymkhana clubs, which were quite close to the High Commission. We used to use one, and it was like walking into an English country club. They had leather sofas, settees, and so on. Tatler magazines, a plethora of servants. And it was very, very much like any club in London, especially a F&CO one, where you went in, it was just like that. But the odd thing was that the local staff there, the Indian staff, were quite happy with that arrangement. And the respect that they got from some of the senior members of the High Commission was atrocious. they treated them like slaves, and they used to, if you played on courts, they used to crack a few balls at some of the locals who were playing there, local businessmen and so on, businessmen, and it was so disrespectful. I hated it, but I'm sure that's died out now.
But that is not dissimilar to the way Indians still treat the lower castes. They are very segregated, aren't they? And to move between castes is nigh on impossible. I think Narendra Modi has maybe changed that a little bit, but we returned to India just before lockdown in February of this year, and the caste system was still very, very apparent and very strong, wasn't it?
Oh yes, I mean, interested in trying to gauge the areas of conflict and so on. So we had quite a lot of conversations with Hindu taxi drivers and Muslim shopkeepers and so on. And it's very much a segregated society. And as you say, the lower castes are still almost despised. They're not looked upon as people who need support and so on. Although they do get some support, but it's mainly charitable. And we had one incident, you'll recall, Jane, when you got into conversation with that South African guy who looked a bit lonely. He had arrived. We'd been there for 2 nights, I think, and Jane spotted him. You spotted him, Jane, sort of standing by himself, looking to see where the dining room was and so on. So you went and invited him to come and join us for breakfast, and he had a T-shirt on with some kind of script on it, and we started talking, and you said to him, "But what are you here for?" And he said, "Well, I'm here to help with a local charity who looks after the low caste system." And so we were really interested in how a South African who had a business near Johannesburg, I think it was, would come, and we said, "Well, what induced you to do that?" He said, "Well, I just got up one morning and thought, I'm not doing anything for anybody." And he said, "My business was quite successful, so I bought a flight to Delhi, and he said he had one contact whom he had spoken to before, who was worked in a charity. So he just turned up, stayed the night in the Taj Palace, which was a 5-star hotel, and off he went. And we saw him later and said, "How was that day?" He said, "Oh my God." He said, "That was interesting." The interesting thing was that they were trying to look after and provide for a group of low caste children, and they had secured a space for them. It was a hall, I think, and he has contacted the charity who are trying to give them a day out and get them out of the environment of the hall that they used. So they went to the local play park with about 20 young children, different ages, and within a few minutes, walking towards the park, it was obvious that the local children despised them, and they were coming up and kicking them and pulling their hair and nipping them. And those little children, when they got into the play park, these other people did the same thing, and it was really visceral. I mean, it was just unbelievable what they were doing. But those kids were smiling and seemed happy. But I thought, wow, there's a lot of tension here, and also with the Hindu Muslim thing, and Modi's change of citizenship for Hindus and Muslims, it's changed a lot, and I think the balance has made it very, very brittle. In fact, 2 days after we came back, the riots started out, and I think anyone could have predicted that there was an undercurrent of bitterness and bad feeling. So that has played out over the last few weeks, last couple of months. But it'll be back. The tensions are too great. There's going to be an upheaval of some sort. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, I noticed that on two levels. So you've got the caste system, which is part of the fabric of the culture of India, and then there's the religious divides, which I have to say, in listening to you and reading books like Prisoners of Geography, you learn a lot about how nations become divided. And we played a part in that once again. So when India became independent, that you had part of what happened there is that the Muslims headed north to east and west Pakistan, and the Hindus headed south into what is now India. But during that split, which Britain had a big part in, the Indians ended up with something like 85% of the wealth capability for those countries, and Pakistan, West and East Pakistan, became agricultural nations. But also the way that happened. So the Muslims were put onto trains heading north, and then the Hindus all headed south from what became West and East Pakistan back into India. And that tension has remained. And then the other interesting thing is that so between 1947 and 1971, when East Pakistan, which became Pakistan as it is now, West Pakistan became Bangladesh. And that was while you were based in India, Dad, that happened. What was the mood within the British High Commission about those changes that were happening north of you in Pakistan and Bangladesh?
Well, I don't. I mean, it's a source of great puzzlement that in the day-to-day work they were doing, it was difficult to see. I mean, there were riots at the time that used to take place periodically, and a group of people who were hostile to the changes would come and demonstrate outside the High Commission, and the gates were closed and locked, and they used to send out one of the remnants of colonialism in Africa, who had been given a job when Kenya, I think, became independent, and used to send him down to remonstrate with the crowd. But his Hindi was quite laughable, and they used to stand there and with their mouths open, saying, "My God, what was he talking about?" You know, and he was such I suppose, a freak that it calmed the passion, and he used to go away shaking their heads. "Oh, no, deal with this one." But yeah, so that process of change that came about before they got independence and afterwards. I mean, it's just shocking when you look back at the decisions that were made, the way those people. I think it was Lord Mountbatten who was one of the people who had the viceroy who had come out and sort out partitioning and the change of borders and so on. But I mean, it's how many people were killed and lost, Hindus and Muslims?
Well over a million.
Like 2 million.
I think it was well over a million. I don't know how many, but it was a lot of people died.
Yeah, and even now, I mean, I don't know if you heard the news a few days ago, but because they were split up in families and so on, and ethnic groups, a lot of people had to come into cities like Delhi to find work. And of course, this latest upheaval and the COVID-19 pandemic has meant that a lot of them are out of work. So, and they can't exist now in a city like New Delhi without earnings and without being able to buy food. So they've been setting off to walk back to where their families are. Some of them 500-600 kilometers. And a few days ago, there were a group of about 30, I think, walking back. And they were walking back on the railroad, on the railway line, and they were, I suppose, tired and thirsty and hungry, and lay down in the middle of the railway line to sleep. And an express train came and killed them all, lying there asleep in the night. So yeah, it's tragic. But that whole thing, with Pakistan and the Hindus and the Muslims, as you say, Narendra Modi has not covered himself with glory. He's obviously very anti Hindus and Muslims rather.
Yeah, it was very apparent. And the other thing which we'll touch on in another podcast, but one of the things that we did a lot everywhere that we lived as children was we traveled a lot. You were very interested in travel, seeing the country that you were based in, and also meeting the people. And some of the trips that we did were incredible, really, looking back. So up to the hill stations, and also one famous trip where we holidayed in Afghanistan. Tell us a little bit about that wanderlust and what you gained from it, and why you were so adventurous to go and see places like Afghanistan, which even back then weren't safe, really. And to take your young family into those areas, for which I'm eternally grateful, I have to add. What was it that spurred you on to go and do and see those things?
Well, I think you can imagine in a foreign country, for especially younger people going there for the first time. It was an adventure, and to travel was one of the things you would do. But there were places in India that, like in Kashmir, they had houseboats, and they had the Taj Mahal, they had Jaipur, and so on. And so most people decided to go and visit there. So they would take the weekend, couple of days, go and see the sights, and then come back. But I didn't fancy that. I thought, no, we can do that anytime. Let's do something more exciting. And I had a chance meeting with a person at a cocktail party, I think, and I was saying, what's the best place to go to get some excitement and so on. So he went through a few places, and then he said, well, why don't you go to Lake Bamiyan in Afghanistan? He said, it's a long journey, but Afghanistan is an intriguing country. It has a lot of things to see, a lot of history. So I thought, well, why not? And what were you at the time? 3, 4, I think.
Yeah, I was old enough to remember. I do remember the journey.
Yes, and it was a tough. I mean, perhaps we'll cover this in another podcast, will we? But it was a tough run. It was temperature was absolutely searing hot. It was so hot. So we had Wilma, your mother, who was pregnant. We had you of between 3 and 4. Me and another girl from the embassy who came with us. And it was just 44 degrees or something like that, I think. And it was punishing. So poor Wilma, your mum, had to endure quite a long journey until we got into Afghanistan. And then crossing into Afghanistan, you thought, this is different. You could feel it. You could see it. You sense it. It was totally different. It was quite hostile in some ways. The terrain was very typical of high ground, very little vegetation. The Hindu Kush, which is this massive range of mountains between Pakistan and Afghanistan. I mean, really rugged, and you just had to drive through it, and you understood how difficult it would have been for invading armies and so on. So, Jane, do you want to cover some of that now? Or?
Well, I think probably what we'll do, Dad, is we'll leave the whole Afghanistan story to another podcast, because there's so much information around what Afghanistan was then and what it has become now. You know, you wouldn't dream of going to Afghanistan on holiday now, which is, having seen the photographs and heard the stories of the terrain and the beauty of it, which is such a tragic shame. But that is the reality of war, isn't it? No, you can't go to some of these amazing places.
Mm. Yeah, you asked a question earlier about I think I missed about changes and how it's affected society in India in particular. And one of the things we should have mentioned was when you mentioned hill stations. Going back 100, 200 years, when Maharajas and independent states were everywhere. That was one of the things that we saw when we were there, is visiting one of those hill stations, which had been part of some sort of fiefdom that had a Maharaja and so on. And all the trappings and the lifestyle, quite amazingly, is still preserved there. And the way that they conduct themselves, the servants they have, their pursuits like tiger shooting and tame elephants, all of that is still part of it, and they love it.
Yeah, it's just such a rich continent, isn't it? You know, the wildlife, the terrain, the people. And that's very much, although we didn't see much wildlife apart from monkeys when we were out there recently, just that whole, the amazing depth of culture and history that India holds is just, it's intoxicating almost, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. And when you see how far their history extends in terms of what they built and what they managed to achieve 300, 400, 500 years ago. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Well, Dad, I think we will leave it there. It is time for lunch, and I know that what happens to you if you don't get your lunch. So I think your energy levels drop quite dramatically. So we'll leave it there. But thank you ever so much, Dad, and we'll in the next podcast we'll catch up on some of our holidaying around the world, different places that we visited as a family. And also we will do a full podcast on Afghanistan as well. So
yes.
Thank you very much, Dad.
Thank you very much.